Monkey D. Garp was born 78 years ago in the East Blue. Not much is known about his childhood, but from the one picture we have of him back then, he seemed to be a free spirit, just like his grandson would be later on. Eventually, he joined the Marines along with his two friends, Sengoku and Suru. Just a year later, he had a son with an unknown woman, who he would name Monkey D. Dragon. Garp spent the next 18 years rising up through the Marine ranks, eventually achieving the rank of Vice Admiral. It's also noted that he was offered the rank of Admiral and could have gone even further, becoming Fleet Admiral, but he turned all that down because he didn't want to be under the direct control of the Celestial Dragons, the rulers of the world. Over the years, he must have seen the horrible things they did and so refused to rank up since that would put him directly under their control. During this time, Garp also developed a rivalry with a pirate around the same age as him, Gol D. Roger. They constantly did battle and had more of a friendly rivalry than a serious one, with Garp stopping at nothing to capture him and Roger doing his best to avoid that. Garp took his promise to capture Roger so seriously that one day, when he was relaxing on vacation, Marine HQ asked him to come help them with the situation involving the Celestial Dragons, and Garp refused to get involved. But when they mentioned Roger, Garp dropped everything and said he was on his way. They quickly traveled to God Valley, where the Rocks Pirates, Roger Pirates, and Celestial Dragons were doing battle. Garp arrived and immediately asked where Roger was. We don't know the specifics of what happened after this, but what we do know is this event would later be called the God Valley Incident and would elevate Garp to worldwide fame, getting him the nickname of the hero of the Marines. Why? While the entire world was told that he alone took down the Rocks Pirates, the most legendary pirate crew in the world, in reality, Garp only survived the incident because he was forced to team up with Roger himself to take on the Rocks Pirates. Garp never spoke of this event because he felt shame, a burden that had to do with him being forced to work with Roger. But the main reason was because he had to defend the Celestial Dragons. He had to protect them and uphold their tyranny directly by ensuring they kept their slaves as well. But all the reports said Garp was the greatest hero alive because of his most shameful moment. He had to live with that, but despite his newfound fame, he went back to his normal duties. Sometime later, he was approached by a young Marine named Kuzan. He asked Garp to take him on as a disciple, but Garp told him to get lost, saying he enjoyed his freedom and didn't want to be tied down with a student. He told him to go to the other instructors, but Kuzan said he already did, and they couldn't teach him anything more and asked to be his disciple again. Garp got angry and yelled at him, but was eventually convinced by Kuzan's persistence. He brought him to his main training ground where he gathered some out-of-commission Navy battleships. For years now, every single day, Garp would hit these ships like they were punching bags. He told Kuzan he didn't use haki for this. It was plain natural strength. And these training sessions weren't just a way to get stronger for Garp, but also a way to relieve stress. While hitting the battleship, he vented the Kusanagi about Dragon joining the revolutionaries, the opposite of what Garp wanted. His life's work was the Marines, and his own son founded an organization to go against the world government. But Garp didn't seek out Dragon to stop him, he just did what he could within his own principles, trying to make the world a better place through the lens of the Marines. So he kept chasing any pirate he came across. The latest one was Don Chenjiao, and in order to make sure he could beat him, Garp upgraded from punching battleships to punching entire mountains to train for him. His hard work paid off, being able to defeat him with one blow. But of course, the main pirate he chased was always Roger. They did battle countless times, but that era was coming to a close. Roger eventually accomplished his dreams, reaching the final island which no one had done for 800 years, and because of this became known as the King of the Pirates. But it wasn't a total victory for Roger. He chose to chase his dreams at that time, because he was dying from a terminal illness, and once he found the One Piece, chose to turn himself in. He robbed Garp of one of his dreams to capture him, which must have ticked him off. But regardless, once he was imprisoned, he asked to speak to Garp, where he revealed his illness and also that he was going to have a child but he would die before it was born, so asked Garp to take care of it. Prevent the government from killing the child and his mother as they would be hunting down everyone related to Roger. He told Garp that since they'd been fighting for so long, he trusted Garp as much as any of his crewmates, so he knew Garp would do it. Although this logic wouldn't usually work, in this case, Garp felt the same, and Roger was right. Garp did everything in his power to protect the child and his mother from the government, eventually tracking her down and contacting her, traveling to where she was for the birth of the child. Unfortunately, he couldn't stop the Marines from snooping around, as that would cause suspicion, so the mother had no choice but to hold her baby inside of her far past what should have been naturally possible. So by the time the Marines stopped their investigation, she couldn't hold on any longer and died soon after giving birth. The child was a boy, and before her death, his mother named him Ace. Goldie Ace, though he would have to be called by his mother's name instead, so no one would know who his father was, so the baby would be called Porcus Ace. And Garp now had an unofficial grandson. He couldn't publicly take care of the boy since someone might have made the connection to Roger, or just naturally investigate the child and find the truth, since Garp was such a famous figure, so he had no choice but to send the child away from him. He chose the Fuchsia Kingdom, the island where he was born, and put Ace in the care of Dadan, a mountain bandit. She had a rough personality, but Garp knew she was soft deep down and could be trusted to take care of Ace. But just to make sure, he threatened to arrest her if she abandoned Ace. Just a few years later, Dragon would have a son named Monkey D. Luffy, and because of his status as the most wanted man alive, he'd have no choice but to leave Luffy in the care of Garp for his own safety. Luffy didn't have the present danger to him that Ace did, so he was a little bit more relaxed, leaving Luffy to stay in Fuchsia Village, still on the same island as Ace but a much quieter and safer area. It seems he left the local townsfolk to raise Luffy for the most part, but he would occasionally visit in between his duties. He started raising Luffy to follow in his footsteps and become a Marine. His training was harsh, involving throwing Luffy down ravines, leaving him in the jungle at night, and tying him to a balloon and watching him fly off, all to test him. This was very extreme, but I get the impression that Garp wouldn't make Luffy do anything he didn't do himself, so I think this is as close of a glimpse as we have to the kind of things that Garp was doing in his childhood. But for a period of time, when Garp was away as usual, something happened. A pirate landed at Fuchsia Village, red-haired Shanks. He inspired Luffy to become a pirate, and after teaching him lessons and ultimately saving his life, that dream was cemented in Luffy. Shanks left him with his prized straw hat, and, along with that, Garp's worst nightmare. When he returned, he found Luffy absolutely determined to become the king of the pirates, the title previously held by Garp's greatest rival, all because of a man who was on Roger's ship to begin with. I'm sure at this moment Garp was probably cursing Roger's grave, and if Roger could see everything that happened, he'd probably be laughing. After this, Garp couldn't take any more chances and took Luffy to Dan. He again used the tactic of threatening Dadan with arrest, and so her hands were tied. Garp told Luffy to get along with Ace, but they didn't get off to the best start. Garp figured it would all work out and so went back to his Marine duties. He went back to visit a few months later and found that Luffy and Ace were getting along, and also that they added someone else to their group, Sabo. Garp treated him as his other grandchildren and decided to spend his visit training them, determined to make them all great Marines. During this time, he had conversations with Ace. He had a huge burden on him being the son of Roger. Everyone he talked to hated Roger and said a child of his didn't even deserve to be born. Ace felt worthless and explained all this to Garp. He asked if he even should have been born, and Garp just said that's something he'd see as he lived. Garp kept pushing Ace and Luffy to be Marines, but he could only do so much with his limited time, and Ace eventually set out to sea to become a pirate, which infuriated Garp. Ace quickly made a name for himself and eventually joined the Whitebeard Pirates. The crew headed up by Edward Newgate, the greatest pirate of the age. And just 3 years later, Luffy too became a pirate, and so Garp had failed. None of his family followed in his footsteps. In fact, they quite literally couldn't have strayed further. Dragon was the most wanted man in the world. Ace was part of the greatest pirate crew in the world, and now Luffy was quickly making a name for himself as well. Garp had no one to pass his great legacy to. He'd already taught them everything he could, and he was making his own way with his own philosophy. So Garp didn't have a true successor, but things have a funny way of falling into place, and soon an opportunity for a new protege would fall into his lap. On a standard trip to the East Blue, he found 2 young Marines, Kobe and Helmeppo, and Garp made the decision to take them back with him to Marine HQ and train them personally. We don't know why he chose these 2 specifically, but maybe he just had a feeling. He trained them every single night using the same brutal techniques he used on Luffy as a child and more, working them to the bone. But after some time, Helmeppo came to talk to him in private and revealed that even after those training sessions, Kobe would sneak away to train more. He would hit the bat all night until his hands bled. That was how determined he was to become a great Marine, and Garp smiled. He tried so hard to make his family into great Marines, But here was this boy that went even further beyond Garp's ruthless training methods to train some more. He was that desperate to become what Garp always wanted his family to be, and that was when he realized he made the right choice. That was when he decided that Kobe was the future of the Marines and would be the one to carry on his legacy. But he still had a long way to go before then. Garp continued to train both him and Helmeppo until they became unrecognizable from how they were just a few months before. But during this time, Garp realized Kobe had another connection to him. He was a friend of Luffy's, and that made Garp think it was time for a reunion. Luffy had just taken on the entire world government at Eni's lobby, something that no pirate had ever done before. So just as with Dragon and Ace, Luffy was now a world-class criminal, and Garp took the chance to corner him in Water 7 before he could get away. He burst into the building Luffy was in and said he had some people for Luffy to meet. But Luffy was currently sleeping, so Garp punched him awake. He called it a fist of love and said Luffy had been causing problems and owed him an apology. Then he started ranting about how him and Ace became pirates after he worked so hard to make them into strong Marines and blamed Shanks for filling him with those ideas. But he was interrupted by Zoro, one of Luffy's crewmates, who started battling through Garp's soldiers. He smiled and ordered Kobe and Helmeppo to stop him. Helmeppo took on Zoro and Kobe took on Luffy, but in the end, they were no match for them. Garp laughed and let them have their reunion later. Garp left, telling Luffy he wouldn't arrest him since he was his grandson. When the fleet admiral heard about this, he ordered Garp to go back. He told Luffy he'd have to kill him but held back immensely, using this as a test for his grandson. He threw cannonballs at him with his bare hands, but he and his crew were strong enough to deflect them. Luffy told Garp he'd see him again and that he was leaving, but this ticked him off, and Garp got a little more serious, throwing a giant iron ball at him. He would die if he couldn't escape, but Garp trusted his grandson's crew, and they were indeed able to get away. And then, pressed Garp, he would never say it, but he didn't mind Luffy being a pirate or Dragon being a revolutionary all that much. He just wanted them to do well in their chosen path. After all, he had Kobe and Helmeppo to bring up now. And this is proven when Garp just laughs whenever Luffy does something insane, pissing off Sengoku in the process. But things would take a much more serious turn. Ace was captured by Blackbeard and turned into the Marines, so Garp went to see him and Impel Down. Ace asked Garp to kill him to stop the coming war, but Garp called him a fool and said that was pointless. The government had angered Whitebeard, the king of the seas, and nothing could stop the war that was coming. Ace started talking about Roger, saying he was good for nothing, but Garp tried to defend him, saying there was nothing he could have done. But Ace ignored him and said that Whitebeard was his only father. On that note, Garp left, heading for Marineford, where Ace was said to be executed shortly. Ace was brought up onto the execution platform, and while Garp made his way there, Sengoku told him he would tell the world everything, and Garp told him to have it his way. And shortly after, Sengoku did just that, revealing to the entire world that Ace was Roger's son. Whitebeard then arrived and the war began. A little while later, Garp went up to the execution platform to be with Ace. He thought back on his time with Ace and Luffy when they were younger and started crying, asking Ace why couldn't he just live the way he wanted him to? And shortly after, things got even worse for Garp when Luffy arrived at the war as well. Both of his grandchildren were in mortal danger, and the worst part about it was he couldn't do anything to help. It would be against the law, of course, but more importantly, his own morals and beliefs. He'd been in the Marines for over 50 years. It was his entire life, his purpose, so he could only sit there and do nothing with his grandchildren being on the opposite side. He knew this could happen. It was why he was so adamant that they didn't become pirates. But his worst nightmare was now unfolding before his eyes. Garp's mind was scrambled. He was right in the middle of his life's work, the Marines, and his beloved family. So in this confusion, he defaulted to his 50 years of experience chasing pirates and distracted himself. When Marco charged towards Ace to rescue him, Garp punched him back, saying that if any of the pirates wanted to get past him, it would be over his dead body. But things were different when the next pirate approached. It was Luffy. Garp jumped down to confront them, and Luffy yelled at him to get out of the way, but Garp refused, saying that he was a Navy Vice Admiral, and that he had been fighting pirates long before Luffy was even born. If he wanted to pass, he'd have to kill him. Just what he told the other pirates. Then he called Luffy by his pirate name, trying his best to ignore that they were family. He said this was the path him and Ace chose, even after he tried so hard to get them away from it. He told Luffy to kill him. That was the only way Ace could be saved. He raised his fist and Luffy powered up, but as he threw his punch, he held back, remembering his beloved grandchildren, and allowed Luffy to knock him down. At the final pivotal moment, Garp chose his family over his career, but it was too late. Ace was hit with a fatal attack from Akanu and Garp watched on in horror. He started stepping towards Akanu and Sengoku slammed him into the ground. He told him he better keep holding him down. If he didn't, he would kill Akainu. And so in the end, all he could do was watch as Ace died. He remembered all his moments with him from birth, and he cried his eyes out. When the war ended, Garp went back to Fuchsia Village. He needed to distract himself, so he went back to work as per usual, defending the village from attacking pirates. He was welcomed as a hero, and he put on a smile, even with all the burden he was carrying. This was his job, but he didn't mind since this was what he had been doing for over half a century. He didn't know anything else, but someone there wouldn't let him take his mind off what happened. Theon smacked him with a piece of wood, throwing him to the ground. She screamed at him, saying he was at the battle, they were right in front of him, but he did nothing to save Ace. He chose his job over his family and said he wasn't a hero, he was worthless. All these words were no surprise to Garp. He'd been thinking all of them about himself ever since Ace's death, and maybe a part of him was happy that Theon was hitting him. Maybe he felt he deserved it. He projected confidence and seemed so sure of himself, but inside he was so confused. If he really knew the answer to everything, he wouldn't have changed his mind so many times during the war. He would have taken a clear stand from the start, but he was constantly conflicted, and that was even more true now. All he felt was regret and uncertainty, and he could no longer continue the way he was going. He stepped down from the Marines, but they wouldn't let him leave entirely. He was like a mascot to them, the greatest Marine. It wouldn't be a good look if he resigned publicly, so he was forced to stay. But his only duty now was to train young Marines, and he didn't hate the idea. That was all he was really motivated to do anymore, so he put his full focus on the next generation. Speaking of which, Kobe was in trouble. He was captured by the Blackbeard pirates, so Garp quickly sailed to Navy Base G14 and got his favorite young Marines to get on board his ship. This, of course, included Helmeppo, who was crying about Kobe being taken. But Garp told him to stop whimpering and get on board, declaring that they would head to the island of Fulielid, Blackbeard's base, and they would save Kobe. He sent some of the Marines to sneak into the island first to free Kobe, who actually got himself free. But once they confirmed he was secure, Garp went forward with his plan. He launched a ship to fly directly into Fulalid. He stood at the very front and raised his arm. He jumped off, telling the pirates to listen up, telling them they shouldn't have captured Kobe. He was the future of the Marines and, more importantly, his protege. Then, from all the way up in the sky, he punched the island with all of his might. He landed and saw that Kobe was safe, running towards him. But at that moment, another Marine was frozen. Garp watched with a look of dread Kuzan, his old disciple. He'd heard that he joined the Blackbeard pirates, but now he saw with his own eyes. He got angry, yelling at him to unfreeze the Marine, let them take Kobe, and come back to the Navy. But Kuzan replied that he decided to live his life on his own terms and froze Garp. He asked if he would kill his old apprentice to save his new one. But Garp replied that he lived in the moment and broke out of the ice, leaping towards Kuzan, grabbing him by the face and slamming him down into the ground, seeing that wavering was a sign of weakness. This is a very interesting line since Garp himself wavered many times in Marineford, so he must have viewed himself as weak in those moments. He's had 2 years since then to really think about things, especially since he didn't have the distraction of his work to take his mind off everything. In that time, he decided to go all in on the next generation, doubling down on his principles. He decided that he didn't waste his life in the Marines and that there was truly a lot of good they could do within the Navy, so he was now steadfast, going all out on Kuzan. Garp then faced the rest of the Blackbeard pirates, dealing with them easily. He prepared to leave as they had Kobe, but just then Kuzan returned. He said he couldn't let them leave. Garp told the Marines they had to make it out alive, then turned to Kuzan, but Kobe got tricked. A Blackbeard pirate pretended to be someone in need, and when he went to rescue her, Shiryu went to ambush him. Garp sensed it and got in the way, getting stabbed right in the stomach. He started bleeding but took the chance to punch Shiryu into the ground. The Marines shouted in concern, but he told them it was nothing and to get back on the ship. Kobe said it was always his fault, but Garp tried to make him not blame himself, saying Shiryu was always after him anyway. Kuzan then charged in, saying Garp raised the formidable enemy, but Garp said he was expelled, and they punched each other. The shockwave was immense, launching Garp backwards. And just then, things got worse as another Blackbeard pirate had a devil fruit that gave him control of the entire island, and he raised a gigantic hand over Garp's ship, threatening to destroy it while Garp's troops, as well as civilians, were on board. Kobe screamed, telling him to stop, but Garp told him not to panic. Justice would prevail. He thought back on a lesson he taught Kobe when he first joined the Marines. He gave a hypothetical: an old man and a baby were going to be left behind on a deadly island, and he could only save one. Who would you pick? Kobe, being selfless, said he'd stay on the island himself so both could make it. But Garp said that was wrong. They should leave the old man behind because he was half dead anyway. The other instructor yelled at Garp, but he stood firm. He said the Navy were meant to protect the future, so in that scenario, take the baby and make the most of the many years they have. Back in present day, the giant hand was bearing down on Garp's ship, and he lay there, unable to do anything. He told his soldiers they could handle it, and they were all shocked. He said he would give them an opportunity and told Kobe to destroy the hand. They tried to object, but he said they had to be decisive. Any hero, anyone that wanted to protect people, didn't have time to stop and think. They had to act. His soldiers listened and went for the hand, and so Garp stood up to do his part. Kuzan asked what he was doing in his injured state, but Garp said they were only scratches and left Kuzan with lightning speed and punched him again. He sped towards the Blackbeard pirate, threatening his ship, and punched him right in the face. He did it. He gave Kobe and the others an opening, and they took it. Kobe destroyed the entire arm with one enormous punch, modeled after Garp's style. The rest of the Marines stopped the rebel from causing any damage and made it back to the ship. So Garp made an announcement the mission to rescue Kobe was complete. He ordered them to get away from the island at full speed. He said that he would manage on his own and their safety was his priority. He told them to keep moving forward. All of them were for the future of the Navy. He lay there with half his body frozen, a spike made of ice piercing through his stomach, surrounded by Blackbeard's entire crew, and all he did was laugh with all of his heart. And the transmission ended. Garp went from his lowest moment back in Marineford, being indecisive, unsure, questioning 50 years of service, to now being completely at peace. And if this was his final moment, he was happy with it, securing the future of the Marines and ensuring that his philosophy would live on. Garp is one of the most flawed characters in One Piece. He's constantly conflicted, caught between two sides: his family and career, something he never asked for but was forced into. He constantly has to choose between them, from spending his time working more than he spent with his family to literally having to choose between his life's work or the lives of his beloved family members. By the end of Marineford, he was confused and broken, but he changed focus. He couldn't change what happened with Ace or the decisions Luffy and Dragon were currently making, so instead of looking to the past, he looked to the future. In the final moment we see him, all his doubt and confliction are seemingly resolved. He's sure of himself and what he's doing, and after all he's been through, he's finally found his peace and he's happy with it. So even though he never wanted the title, he might really end up becoming the hero of the Marines by saving the new generation who will no doubt change the world of One Piece. So this is it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this.